Hi guys, today we are going to be talking about consciousness raising. And first we are going to define consciousness raising, and dictionary.com defines it as any method for increasing interpersonal awareness or sensitivity by teaching people to experience a situation or point of view radically different from their own. So specifically, we are going to be talking today about consciousness raising in terms of feminism and gender. And this article in 2004 gives the rhetorical functions of consciousness raising, especially in third wave feminism. Women would share their personal experiences with one another. They would have discussions, so show support, and work through different personal experiences as well as relating to the speaker. They would talk about taboo topics such as sexuality, gender, and oppression. And they would also talk about resisting oppression, the actions they can take, and how to organize new consciousness raising groups. Next, I'm going to hand it on to Matthew to talk about the origins of consciousness raising.
Hey guys, I'm Matthew, and the concept of consciousness raising was actually started by Ann Forer, Kathy Sarachild, and the feminist organization known as the New York Radical Women in the 1960s. It all originated because Sarachild, she overheard a conversation that Forer was having with a group of these radical women. Essentially, Forer was trying to find out how these women were oppressed throughout their lives, because she wanted to raise her own consciousness to better understand what's going on with their issues. And so Sarachild took that and she internalized it and then created the concept of consciousness raising. Next slide, please. So basically, throughout Sarachild's life, she's obviously been a firm advocate of trying to understand the oppression of women, including her own. So she felt that basically raising the consciousness of an individual woman's issues would be valuable for the long-term goal of all women in general. And as you see in the picture, her name, Sarachild, was actually, it was changed to that because from her original name, because her mother's name was Sarah, and she was also a predominant feminist during that time. So sidebar, moving along, we're gonna talk about a little bit of the application process. So I'll pass it over to Megan.
Now that we've established where consciousness raising originates from, let's discuss its real-life application. The New York Radical Feminists provide some suggestions for how meetings centered around consciousness raising should go. They suggest groups of 8 to 12 people, meetings once a week which should last around 3 hours, and a suitable environment which includes informality, comfort, privacy, and punctuality. Next slide, please. The most effective process of consciousness raising follows a 3-step format. The first step is to decide on a topic. Once a topic has been chosen, the discussion may begin. The group should go around in a circle so everyone has an opportunity to speak. Group members should be speaking from personal, specific experiences. They should not interrupt when others are speaking, challenge others' experiences, or even offer advice. Consciousness raising shouldn't be a therapy session. It should just be an exchange of knowledge. Once everyone has had a chance to speak and the conversation has dwindled down, a conclusion should be made. This should be a summation of everyone's experiences, where the goal is to find commonality between them so the group can better identify and understand their oppression. And now I'll hand it off to Nemo.
There are many topics that can be applied to consciousness raising, stemming from gender and sexuality oppression. The LGBTQ plus community faces many barriers to sensitive topics. Social structure has limited many applications of understanding. So, for example, in partner violence, the LGBTQ perspective is not as represented because of the lack of support, even though the LGBT community is comparable or higher in partner violence. This stems from a feminist perspective since the early 1980s, when the experiences were beginning to be shared, such as publications of lesbian relationships and partner violence in books, and has been talked about, and the consciousness has been rising. more conversations being looked at, being had for this purpose. If we want to talk more about purpose, we're going to go on to Jared.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about the purposes of consciousness raising, and this all comes from the New York Radical Feminist Guidelines. So the first purpose is to bring awareness to societal pressures that oppress women. So this is just highlighting the pressures that women do receive from society. Ellis 2002 talks about developing explicit knowledge of grammar. So this highlights that it's very important to create terms and create words for these terms. It's easier to talk about because when you don't have a term, it's very hard to talk about. So the second purpose is to break down barriers to encourage open and honest communication among women. So with these barriers broken down, women are freely able to talk openly and honestly with one another, which is super important. And the third purpose of consciousness raising is to develop pride in being a woman through identification with other women. So now that the barriers are broken down, you're able to openly and honestly communicate with one another, and then I'd be able to identify and develop pride with each other, strengthen numbers. So go on to the next slide. So in conclusion, we were able to define consciousness raising, talk about the origins, the steps, some suggested topics, and finally the purposes of consciousness raising. So here are our references, and thank you so much for listening.